What's up, guys, and welcome to another daily outlook. So, in these daily outlooks, I go over my main pairs, I will analyze the chart and see what we're up to for the next day or tomorrow, even. So, let's begin with DXY and let's see what the weekly time frame is doing, right? So, we can see that we are inside this big weekly demand zone and we took weekly liquidity. So, what could we expect? A little pullback up higher into maybe at least this supply, right? And from there we could sell off. So that's a possibility on the weekly. So let's go over to the daily now and let's see if we can get that confirmation in order to trade up higher in towards this weekly supply, right? So first of all, let's look at the fractals and we can see that we are fractal bullish, right? So now we are inside this demand and from here we could trade up higher again. Okay, now keep in mind we had the big move in towards the downside, so what could also happen that we now have that consolidation and then a falling knife to trade down lower. So when taking a long in this position, make sure you have more than enough confirmation, because otherwise the XY could give that falling knife and trade down lower. Okay, now if you go over to the 4-hour, then what do we see? Well, of course, that we now turned 4-hour bullish on the swing structure. So what do we then have? We take our premium versus discount tool and we see where price could retrace to. And what do we see? Well, we see some equal lows over here where some liquidity is located, and that 50% is also there with a demand zone where we could trade in towards, and from there we could trade up higher again, right? So let's see if price trades down lower in here. What do we see? We see all of this consolidation. So it is not A plus to think that it's high probability that price is going to trade up higher, because price could just range like this, boom, then boom, right? And then fall off. So when trading DXY, make sure you have enough confirmation. For example, if we trade down lower, then a fractal break, and then you could even wait for another fractal break, and then we are sure that we can get that pullback. Otherwise, I'm just staying out of this position because price is just too rangy after that big move in towards the downside. Okay, going over to my next pair, Euro USD. Let's look at the daily first. So at the daily, what could we expect? Well, of course, we are daily bullish, right? And now we could expect a move down lower in towards those discount prices, right? We also took some liquidity above this high, and what then happened? We got early sellers, we then swiped early sellers, and now we got the daily fractal break. So we are now inside daily supply. We could from here trade down lower, but again the DXY is not looking too great, so it might not be A plus to take a short, although the euro is getting a little bit weakener. So yeah, I would definitely look at some possible short setups from this daily supply. So going over to the 4-hour, what can we see? Well, of course, opposite from the DXY, we are 4-hour swing bearish now. And then what would we want to see? Well, of course, liquidity to get taken, maybe a tap in towards those premium prices, this supply zone, and then from there, of course, wait for confirmation, and then you could take a possible short setup to trade down lower in towards the lows, right? So that is also what I'm waiting for. I got my alert on top of this liquidity, and after that I will wait for some order flow switch again in towards the downside, right? And then I will be ready to take shorts. GBP USD, well, on the daily first, we can see that we are inside this daily supply and we took some internal daily liquidity, right? Then what can we see? Well, of course, that we are now daily fractal bearish. Okay, so now we have this supply, and from this supply we could trade down lower. So if you then go over to the 4-hour, let's see. Well, we still have this refined supply open over here on the 4-hour, and it's this supply. So we got to keep that in mind that we could maybe swipe everyone and then trade down lower. Okay, it's just something to keep in mind. It's not something where we need to wait for in order to go short from, because we're already daily fractal bearish. Well, I can see that they just took liquidity over here. So if we see some downside again, we could then take some possible short setup. Okay, keep in mind though, we are not for our swing bearish on the GBP USD pair. So before taking any short, I'm definitely waiting for a candle close, and then we could trade down lower. Okay, but for now, yeah, I would definitely wait for that candle close before looking at any setup, because this could just be a liquidity grab in order to trade up higher in line with the falling knife on the DXY. Going over to AD USD now. Well, what can we see? We took all of the liquidity under these lows, and I would like to see this 4-hour demand also get tapped. So I would wait for another swipe, because this now are early buyers. Then we swipe early buyers, and then after confirmation, the real move into its upside will happen, and that is when I go long. So it still needs some more development, but yeah, after we see another swipe, then confirmation, and then I will go long if the DXY is also in line. Okay, then we have NZD USD. Well, we are bullish, we are inside demand, we took some internal liquidity, we had early buyers, now we swiped early buyers, and we are around the discount prices. So what I would now look for is for that auto flow switch, because we broke this over here, and then if we break this high, then we change the auto flow, and then you could then again look for long setups, right? So that is what I'm waiting for on NZD USD. Yeah, exactly this. So going over to gold now. Well, I don't like to trade gold at the moment, but let me analyze it. So we are for our bullish all the way over here, and we have an extended move into our upside. Well, what do we see now? That we are breaking things into our downside, and that price could trade down lower from this supply. Are you going to take a short setup? Well, in my opinion, it's better than taking a long setup in this position, but I don't think that price is high probability to take a short or a long setup. Reason being, once again, like I say in all my outlooks, we are at all-time high. So what could expect? We could see a pullback, but what could also happen, that we just trade up higher, right? So it could also be that we are having some correction pattern, right? Trending up, correction pattern, and then trade up higher. So that's also possible. Now we also just trade into this demand, so this could push price back up higher again, right? So that's why I won't take any short. And why should I take a long setup? Well, we are still inside the supply, so it's not valid. Maybe if we break the fractal over here, then you could look at possible long setups, but then again, we are at all-time high, so it's not the best to take a long setup. But I think by looking at it, this might just be if you're going to trade gold, then this would be the setup that I would wait for. I'm not going to take it, because I think other pairs are forming way more nicely than gold at the moment. Looking at the yen basket, well, what can we see on the daily first? On the daily, we are still inside this demand, but we can also see that we just make connection with this imbalance candle over here, and this could push price up higher all the way into our house, right? Reason being, we are daily bullish, and I think in the long term we can trade into that high, right? Also with the fundamentals. So if you now look at the order flow, well, we are respecting the demand zones at all time, and we're just trading up higher, and we're now inside this demand, which could push price up higher again. So now that we see a reaction from this demand, and we took some liquidity under the lows, well, now I think we could trade up higher. So looking at the 4-hour, we are, in my opinion, 4-hour bullish. Reason being, boom, 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 boom. If you look at the higher time frame, like what's happening or the bigger picture, well, we're trading down lower, up higher, down lower, and now I think we can trade up higher again. So what do we see now? Well, we are inside this 4-hour demand, and I think from here we could see higher prices in towards the upside. Well, if you now look at the 1 hour, well, what do we see? Okay, we are 1 hour bearish, so that is not in our favor, because we then could trade down lower. But I can see that first of all, the weekly and daily open is all the way to the downside. So if we get some confirmation, then I think we could actually trade above that weekly open and make a wick above these opens, right? We can also see that we have some supply over here, which doesn't look too bad to trade in towards. And well, we are inside this demand. Oh, right, inside this demand, and we are swiping the liquidity lows, right? So for now the order flow is bearish because we had this supply, then we now have this supply in control, right? And now which supply is in control? Well, of course this supply is in control, but if we break that supply in towards upside, then order flow switches bullish, and then we could start looking for longs in towards minimum that weekly low, and in the long term, of course, all those highs, right? So that's also what I'm waiting for. I got my alert on that high. For if we break it, then I know the order flow has been switched, and I will look for yen longs or XXX JPY shorts. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for, to take this one out, and then we can go long. Okay, now going over to euro yen. Well, let's see at the daily first. Well, on the daily we took liquidity, and then we are still inside this demand, which is pushing price up higher. What I think is that we could still take out all the lows and trade in towards this amount, also in line with the yen basket that should trade up higher, right? So I am looking at shorts because I think it's very likely, even though we are respecting this demand. If you look at the 4-hour, well, what can we see? Of course, after grabbing that liquidity, right, we saw a strong move in towards the downside, and there we created some supply, and I think that now, after grabbing this liquidity high, we could now see a move down lower, especially under this weekly open. But I think in the long term we could trade all the way down lower this week in towards this demand, right? So that is also what I'm waiting for. Now if you look at the 1 hour, well, what can we see? We are now inside this supply, and what did we do? Well, we took liquidity above this high, right? And then this is our 1 hour fractal break, which we would like to see break. And then if we see that break, then you could start looking for some short setups in towards that weekly open. Then again, what do we see? Well, we had a daily bullish order flow. We are 4-hour bullish, and yeah. So it could also be that we trade up higher all the way in towards highs. But with my yen analysis, which should trade up higher, well, what we could then see is, of course, a drop all the way in towards the lows, and we now have supply, and we also have that yearly level, which is a zone, so we could also react to the downside from now. And then all of these liquidity lows with this demand is something really nice to target. So what I will do is I will wait for some more confirmation on the 4-hour in order to take a short setup. So let's say if we break this low, right, then I will possibly take a swing setup from that weekly open with my stop above this high, and then I will take a short in towards that amount. This looks like a nice setup, which is higher probability than the 1 hour setup which we have at the moment, but I think still it's possible but I will just wait for some more 4-hour confirmation. Going over to GJ now, well, what can we see on the daily first? Well, we took liquidity above the high, but what does this mean? That we could trade down lower, right? So we could take liquidity at the lows, and this is a possibility. But then we look at when are we going to trade down lower? Well, for now, the daily demand is still in control and pushing price up higher. And if we look at the 4-hour, we can also see that we still have this 4-hour supply open, right? So we could see this as early sellers, and then a swipe them stop losses, and then the real move into the downside could happen. Now what we could also see is that the order flow is still bullish on the 4-hour. We are respecting the lows at all time. So once again, only after order flow switch I will take a short setup. And maybe, or so once again, this is now our demand which is in control. Well, if we break the demand, then I'm definitely ready to take a short setup. But if we swipe the highs first, and then I would like to see an order flow change, and then I will take a short setup. So I would just like to see an order flow change because we took liquidity on the daily, which could be enough after seeing order flow change bearish, and then I will take a short setup in towards the downside. Going over to USD yen now. Well, on USD yen, the order flow is already bearish. So looking at the weekly, what can we see? Well, we are weekly bearish and we broke structure over here, so we could expect a move in towards the premium prices, right? From this high in towards this low, okay? But what do we see? We still have this weekly supply which is in control and could push price down lower in towards this refined demand with this not yet tapped in towards that demand. So looking at the daily then, well, kind of the same, but then we have this supply which is in control, and this is also the daily fractal high, and this is the daily fractal low, with our daily fractal being bearish. So we could respect the highs and we could just trade down lower in towards these lows and in towards that weekly demand. So going over to the 4-hour now, well, we can see that with 4-hour bearish, this is our 4-hour swing high as well as a daily fractal high. So we could just expect it to hold and that we're not going to break it. Well, for now, we also switched order flow in towards the downside over here. So we now have this supply which is in control. And I think from this supply, you could definitely look at some shorts to trade down lower. It still is risky though, because we have one liquidity high, a second liquidity high, and now maybe a third liquidity high, which you could liquidate before moving down lower. But once again, it's a daily fractal and it's a 4-hour swing, so I think we could respect it if we see enough confirmation. So looking at the 1-hour, what is enough confirmation? Well, we are already 1-hour trend bearish, and we took liquidity above this high, and we are now inside this refined supply zone, right? So let me draw that down real quick, this liquidity. Oh, and then I would like to see some confirmation, of course, right? So what is our fractal low? Well, this is our fractal low. So I would like to see a double fractal break on the 1-hour. Reason being, we have lots of liquidity above these highs, okay? So if I see this fractal low go, a pullback, then another fractal break, then I would definitely take a short setup to trade down lower in towards these lows, okay? So that's my thing that I'm looking at for today, and I'm also going to put my alert on this first fractal break, so I know I know when that fractal break has happened. So going over to ADN now, well, looks like well, let's look at the daily. So what can we see? We have bearish order flow, we took liquidity, and we could then again trade down lower. The only thing is that we're now inside this demand, which is also holding with that monthly open, and this could push price up higher again. So keep that in mind, even though that the order flow is bearish. If you look at the 4-hour, well, once again, if you look at the bigger picture, what's happening? move down lower, move up higher, move down lower, move up higher, move down lower. So this is the bigger picture, and that's also how swing works. But if you look at the real technicals, then this could be your swing, and then this, and then this. So we are now swing bullish, but keep in mind that we could still trade down lower, because if you really look at what's happening, then you can see that we could still trade down lower. So that's something to keep in mind when trading the trend. Okay, well, so I'm going to remove these because I like to look at the bigger picture instead of these small moves which are happening inside, internally, right? So now what can we see? Well, of course, that we had this supply, and then we had some bearish order flow, which is in control, right? Now we have this supply, and from this supply, I think I will look at shorts. Well, of course, after confirmation, but I think it looks really nice to take a short setup from this supply. Okay, so I also have my alert on that supply, and then I will just wait for confirmation in order to take a short setup. Going over to Swiss yen now, or NZD yen first. So what can we see on NZD yen? Well, I don't like this price action at all because we have liquidity at the highs. That's one thing we need to take in account. Then if you look at the bigger picture, well, of course, this is our bigger picture. And then we could trade down lower, right? So we could expect this high to hold. And now we took liquidity above these highs. So of course, we could trade down lower. We see a movement towards the downside, then some consolidation, and then we could trade down lower again. So what do we now have? Well, of course, this supply, which could push price down lower. And I'm also going to put my alert on top of this, just so I know when we hit this supply. Now, if you look, well, of course, we still have some liquidity at the lows. So I'm definitely looking for that supply to get hit, then some confirmation, and then I will take a short setup in towards those liquidity lows and maybe the monthly open. So that's what I'm waiting for, but it needs a lot more development. So yeah, let me just wait for that, and I'll think that I will come back to this tomorrow or even later. Going over to Swiss yen, well, what do we see? First of all, on the daily. Well, on the daily, we are daily bullish, and we had this demand which we respected, and we created new demand which we could of course expect to respect. So we could trade up higher and trade in towards this refined supply with these equal highs over here. So looking at the 4 hour, well, what do we see on the 4 hour? Well, on the 4 hour we are swing bearish. So what does that mean? That we could respect this high, but then again, higher time frame over 4 hour, over lower time frame, and daily is more higher time frame than a 4 hour. So I wouldn't mind if we just trade up higher and break this swing. Okay, so what do we then see? Well, of course, we had this daily demand, and inside this daily demand we had for our internal liquidity, which we perfectly grabbed, and now we could trade up higher. Okay, so what's happening? We now have this demand which is in control, and this could push price up higher again. The only thing that's stopping me to take a long setup from this 4 hour demand is first this weekly open, because I would like to see go under that weekly open, and then I could take a long setup. And then the second thing is I see the yen basket as a strong at the moment, so it could just be that if the yen is strong, that this could just take out all of the liquidity lows over here. So that's something to really keep into account when trading yen pairs, that you need to take into account the yen basket, because otherwise you might get your hand burn on not an A+ setup. But that was it, guys. I hope you liked it, and see you in the next one. Ciao.